In 1885, in the vast, untamed heart of the Montana Territory, 4 brothers made a desperate gamble for the future of their family ranch. Lonely and overworked, they staked their fortunes and their hearts on the promises of a mail-order bride catalogue. Beau Finn Owen and Reese Dalton each sent a letter, a train ticket, and a prayer to 4 different women back east. They expected 4 strangers. They anticipated a new, albeit awkward, beginning. What they didn't know was that their individual futures were about to arrive on the very same stagecoach, bound together by a secret that could either build a dynasty or burn their world to the ground. This is the story of the 4 women who answered their call, and the stunning truth that they were all sisters. The dust of Promise Creek, Montana, was a fine reddish powder that settled on everything, on the thirsty clapboard buildings, on the sweat-slicked rumps of horses tied to hitching posts, and on the anxious shoulders of the 4 Dalton brothers. They stood on the platform of the Overland Stagecoach office, a quartet of mismatched grit and hope. Beau Dalton, the eldest at 30, was the anchor. Broad-shouldered and quiet, his face was a roadmap of responsibility carved by sun and worry. He'd inherited the sprawling, struggling Dalton ranch, and with it, the welfare of his 3 younger brothers. It was his practical, no-nonsense idea to seek wives through the matrimonial times. A ranch needed women, he'd argued, not for romance, but for stability. A ranch needed heirs. Beside him, Finn Dalton, 5 years his junior, shifted his weight with an impatient energy. He was the charming one with a quick smile and eyes that held a restless flicker. Finn had agreed to the scheme on a lark, amused by the sheer audacity of it. He'd picked his bride from the catalogue based on a single line in her description, "possesses a lively wit." He figured life in Montana could use a little more wit and a lot less work. Owen, the 3rd brother, stood slightly apart. He was the scholar, the thinker, his hands more accustomed to the pages of a book than the handle of an axe, though he did his share of both. He was a man of gentle disposition, and his choice of a bride had been agonizing. He'd finally settled on a woman who claimed to love poetry and pressed flowers. He dreaded the awkwardness of her arrival, yet yearned for a kindred spirit in their rough-hewn world. And then there was Reese, barely 20, the youngest. His face was still open and full of an earnest eagerness that the territory hadn't yet managed to stamp out. He was thrilled by the entire endeavor, viewing it as the grandest adventure of his life. He'd picked a bride who simply sounded kind, and he had spent weeks imagining her arrival, picturing a life of shared smiles and simple joys. The distant rumble and the plume of dust on the horizon silenced their low chatter. The stagecoach, a lumbering beast of wood and leather, was coming. "Right then," Beau grunted, setting his jaw. "Remember the plan. Be gentlemen. Help with their trunks. No spooking them before they've had a hot meal." "I know how to treat a lady, Beau," Finn said, with a grin adjusting the collar of his shirt. "Might be you who needs the reminder. Try smiling. It won't break your face." The coach thundered into town and skidded to a halt, the horses snorting and stamping. The driver, a grizzled man named Gus, spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Got a special delivery for you, Daltons," he bellowed. 4 of them. The brothers exchanged a confused glance. 4. The agent inside the office was only supposed to be holding 3 tickets. Beau's bride, a sensible-sounding widow named Mrs. Peterson, was due next month. He was only here to support his brothers. The coach door swung open. The first to emerge was a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20. She had a heart-shaped face and wide, hopeful eyes that took in the dusty street with a look of pure wonder. This was Genevieve Vance, though the brothers didn't know her name yet. Rhys felt his own heart give a hopeful lurch. She looked exactly as kind as he'd imagined. She turned to help the next passenger. Out came another woman, her movements graceful and serene. She clutched a leather-bound portfolio to her chest as if it were a holy relic. Her expression was gentle, almost timid, as she scanned the rough-looking town. This was Rosalind Vance. Owen instinctively took a step forward, a protective urge surprising him. Then came the third. She didn't descend so much as disembark, her back straight and her chin held high. Her gaze was sharp and appraising, missing nothing. She had a fiery spark in her eyes that dared the world to challenge her. This was Isabel Vance, and she looked like she could handle a charging bison with a stern word. Finn's smirk widened. This had to be his lively wit. The brothers were already overwhelmed. 3 women all arriving at once, but then a fourth figure appeared in the doorway of the coach. She was the eldest, her bearing radiating a quiet authority and a deep, weary strength. She paused on the step, her eyes finding the 4 men on the platform. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and held a profound sadness that she tried to conceal beneath a veneer of composure. This was Eleanora Vance. The 4 women stood together before the 4 brothers. They were all different in age, in demeanor, in expression, but the resemblance was undeniable. The same finely boned cheeks, the same determined set to their jaws, the same deep auburn hue in their hair, catching the afternoon sun like threads of fire. Gus the driver broke the stunned silence. Well, I'll be. Like a matched set of china dolls, all addressed to the Dalton Ranch. Beau's mind was racing. This was a disaster, a mistake of colossal proportions. He stepped forward, his hat in his hand. "Mum," he began, addressing the eldest one. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. We were expecting 3 ladies." Separately. Eleanora Nora, as she was called by her sisters, met his gaze without flinching. Her voice when she spoke was clear and steady, though laced with an exhaustion that went bone deep. "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Dalton," she said. "My name is Eleanora Vance. These are my sisters Isabel Rosalind and Genevieve." She gestured to each in turn. "You are Beau, Finn, Owen, and Rhys Dalton. You each sent for a bride. We are the women who answered." A gust of wind swept through the street, kicking up dust and rattling the sign above the stagecoach office. The 4 brothers stared, mouths agape. Rhys looked at Jenny Owen, at Rose Finn, at Izzy. It was all starting to make a terrifying kind of sense, but that still left Beau and the eldest sister, Nora. "But I didn't—" Beau started his mind, fumbling for an explanation. He hadn't sent for a bride yet. His letter was still sitting on his desk, unsent. Nora's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of vulnerability showing through. The Matrimonial Times made an error in their printing. They listed 4 brothers at the Dalton Ranch, seeking wives. When we saw the advertisement, we saw a chance. A single chance to stay together. The unspoken desperation hung in the air. These weren't 4 independent women seeking husbands. This was a family, a unit, cast adrift and looking for a safe harbor. Finn was the first to recover, a slow, appreciative whistle escaping his lips. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured, his eyes fixed on Isabel, who glared back at him as if he were a particularly persistent horsefly. "What do we do, Beau?" Rhys whispered, his hopeful expression now clouded with confusion. Beau looked from his brothers' stunned faces to the 4 women. They looked tired and travel-worn, but there was a fierce, protective unity about them. They stood shoulder to shoulder, a small, defiant island in the vast, dusty expanse of Promise Creek. He saw their meager luggage, a few trunks and canvas bags that likely held everything they owned in the world. He saw the hope in the youngest's eyes and the wariness in the eldest's. His practical mind screamed at him to send them back. This was not the deal. It was complicated, messy, and bound to fail. The ranch could barely support the 4 of them, let alone 8. But his conscience, a quieter but more persistent voice, saw 4 women who had traveled 2,000 miles on a desperate prayer. He drew a long, slow breath, the dust filling his lungs. "Gus," he said, his voice rough with authority. "Help us get these ladies' trunks loaded onto the wagon." He turned back to Nora, his expression unreadable. "The ranch is a 2-hour ride from here. You and your sisters must be tired. You can rest there for the night." And then he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We will talk." It wasn't a promise of a future. It was a temporary truce. But for the 4 Vance sisters, standing under the harsh Montana sun, it was the first glimmer of hope they had seen in a very long time. The Dalton Ranch was less a picturesque homestead and more a testament to stubborn persistence. The main house, built of sturdy logs, chinked with mud and moss, was large but weathered, surrounded by a collection of barns, corrals, and sheds that all looked to be in various states of hard-won survival. It was a place built for work, not comfort, and the arrival of the 4 Vance sisters threw its masculine equilibrium into immediate and utter chaos. The first few days were a study in awkward choreography. 8 people moved around a space designed for 4 bumping elbows and exchanging polite, strained murmurs. The sisters, accustomed to the close quarters of their former life, navigated the shared space with a practiced grace, but the brothers seemed to have lost control of their own limbs. Finn nearly upended a bucket of milk, trying to step out of Izzy's way, while Reese managed to trip over a rug that had lain in the same spot for 10 years, simply because Jenny was in the same room. The sisters immediately set about trying to impose a semblance of order on the bachelor chaos. Nora, with a quiet, firm efficiency, took over the kitchen. The brothers, used to a diet of beans bacon, and whatever game they could shoot, were startled by the appearance of properly baked bread, savory stews, and even a wild berry pie. Beau watched her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. She was competent, he couldn't deny that, but her very presence was a constant, silent negotiation, a reminder of the impossible situation they were in. Their evenings were the most telling. After supper, the 8 of them would gather in the main room, the air thick with unspoken questions. Owen would retreat to a corner with a book, though his eyes would often drift towards Rose, who sat by the fire, her sketchbook open on her lap. She drew with a focused intensity, capturing the dance of the flames or the weary lines on her sisters' faces. One evening, Owen mustered the courage to look over her shoulder. She wasn't sketching portraits. She was drawing intricate designs for quilts, patterns of astonishing complexity and beauty. "That's remarkable," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Rose flushed, startled. "It's just foolishness. A way to pass the time." "It's not foolish," Owen insisted softly. "It's art." A fragile connection sparked between them, a shared appreciation for a world beyond the grit and toil of their immediate surroundings. Meanwhile, Finn and Isabel were engaged in a different kind of dance, a constant war of attrition, fought with sharp words and sharper glances. Finn, used to charming his way through life, found himself utterly disarmed by Izzy's refusal to be impressed. "A woman's touch certainly improves the place," he'd said one morning, gesturing at the clean table. "I'm sure a man's effort in the barn would improve it more." She'd shot back without missing a beat, continuing to knead dough with a furious energy. Her defiance only intrigued him more. He saw past the prickly exterior to the fierce loyalty she had for her sisters, the way she was always watching over Jenny or helping Nora without being asked. He started leaving small offerings for her, a wildflower on the porch rail, the choicest piece of jerky from his hunt, which she pointedly ignored, though a faint blush on her cheeks told him they hadn't gone unnoticed. The youngest pair, Rhys and Jenny, found their footing most easily. Their connection was simple and unburdened by the complexities weighing on their older siblings. They fell into a natural rhythm doing chores together. Rhys showed her how to milk the cow without getting kicked, and she taught him the names of the constellations from a book she'd brought from Boston. Her laughter, a bright, clear sound, began to echo in the dusty yard, a sound the ranch hadn't heard in years. For Rhys, her presence was like a sudden sunrise after a long night. The true conflict, however, simmered between the two leaders, Bo and Nora. They were two pillars of responsibility, each carrying the weight of their family's survival. Their conversations were brief, practical, and charged with unspoken tension. "We'll need to order more flour from Mr. Henderson's general store," she'd say. "I'll see to it," he'd reply, his tone clipped. "The roof over the pantry is leaking." "I'm aware." One evening after the others had retired, Bo found her alone by the cold hearth, staring into the embers. The facade of strength had crumbled, and in the dim light he saw the deep, profound weariness in her face. "You can't stay," he said, his voice softer than he intended. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact. "You have to see that. This won't work." Nora looked up, her eyes glistening. "Where would we go, Mr. Dalton? Back to Boston, where we have nothing and no one. We spent every last dollar we had on those train tickets. We have nowhere else to go." "That's not my burden to bear," he said, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. "I know that," she whispered, "but I am asking you to bear it, just for a little while longer. Let us prove our worth. We are not afraid of work. Let us earn our keep. If after a month you still believe we are a burden, we will leave." "I give you my word." Her plea was stripped of all pretense. It was raw, desperate, and honest. Bo looked at this woman who carried herself with the grace of a queen, but whose hands were already becoming chapped from lye soap and hard work. He saw his own reflection in her, the endless responsibility, the sleepless nights, the quiet fear of failure. "1 month," he said, his voice a low growl. "You have 1 month to prove this arrangement isn't a fool's bargain." He turned and left before she could see the conflict warring in his own eyes. He had given them an ultimatum, a deadline. But as he lay in his bunk that night, listening to the unfamiliar, softer sounds of the house, the quiet murmur of sisters talking in the room, they now shared the gentle hum of a lullaby. Rose was singing to Jenny. He had the unnerving feeling that the Dalton ranch and his own guarded heart had already been irrevocably changed. The 1-month deadline felt less like an exit strategy and more like a countdown to a choice he was terrified to make. The month began to pass, and a fragile routine settled over the ranch. The Vance sisters were true to their word. They worked from sunrise to sunset, their industry shaming the brothers into a new level of diligence. The house was spotless, the larder was better stocked than ever before, and the garden, long neglected, began to show neat rows of burgeoning life under Rose and Jenny's care. Izzy, to Finn's astonishment, proved to have a preternatural skill with recalcitrant livestock, her sharp tongue seemingly as effective on stubborn mules as it was on him. Slowly the tension between the two families began to dissolve, replaced by a cautious respect. Laughter became more common. Shared smiles across the dinner table were no longer a rarity. Finn and Izzy's verbal sparring took on a playful edge, and Owen and Rose would often be found in quiet conversation, their heads bent together over a book or a drawing. But a shadow lingered, a secret that Nora guarded with a fierce, desperate intensity. The story she had told Bo that they had come west simply to stay together was only a partial truth. They hadn't just come seeking opportunity. They were fleeing a past that was far more dangerous than the untamed Montana wilderness. The first hint of that past arrived not with a thunderclap, but with the quiet arrival of the weekly mail pouch in Promise Creek. Owen had ridden into town for supplies and brought back a letter addressed not to the Daltons but to the Mrs. Vance. The postmark was from Boston. Nora took the letter with a hand that trembled slightly. She retreated to the small room she shared with her sisters, the mood inside instantly shifting from one of hopeful industry to one of hushed fear. The letter was from a friend, a lawyer's clerk named Mrs. Gable, who had promised to keep them informed. Nora read it aloud, her voice low and tight. "My dearest girls," it began. "I pray this finds you well and safe. I must be brief. Inquiries have been made. A man from the Pinkerton Detective Agency, a Mr. Davies, has been asking questions all over your old neighborhood. He did not say who hired him, but he mentioned your family by name. He was asking about your father's business affairs and most pointedly about your final whereabouts. The name Sterling was mentioned. Please be careful. Burn this letter. Yours in friendship, Martha Gable." The air in the room grew cold. Jenny let out a small, frightened gasp, while Izzy's hands clenched into fists. Rose's face went pale. "Sterling!" Izzy spat the name like poison. "He won't stop. He'll never stop." "What do we do, Nora?" Rose asked, her voice trembling. Nora folded the letter, her face a mask of grim resolve. "We do nothing," she said. "We continue as we are. Montana is a long way from Boston. We are safe here. Mr. Dalton will protect us." The word sounded hollow, even to her own ears. How could she expect Bo Dalton to protect them from a threat he didn't even know existed? Their entire presence here was built on a lie of omission. The secret began to eat at her. She would watch Bo as he worked, his quiet competence, a source of both comfort and guilt. He was an honorable man. He had given them shelter based on a half-truth, and now their presence was putting him and his entire family in danger. The thought was unbearable. The pressure came to a head a week later. A well-dressed stranger rode into Promise Creek. He wasn't a cowboy or a prospector. He wore a city suit and a bowler hat, and he moved with a quiet, observant purpose. He spent an afternoon in the saloon, not drinking heavily but listening. He asked Henderson at the general store about the new arrivals at the Dalton place. This was Mr. Davies, the Pinkerton man. Finn, who had been in town for a poker game, saw the man and felt a prickle of unease. He reported it back at the ranch that evening. "Looked like a law man, but not from around here. Asked a lot of questions about you four," he said, looking directly at Nora. That night, the weight of the secret became too much for Nora to bear. After the others were asleep, she found Bo on the porch, staring out at the vast, star-dusted darkness. "Mr. Dalton," she began, her voice tight, "I have not been entirely honest with you." Bo turned slowly, his face shadowed. "I reckoned as much." Taking a deep breath, Nora told him a carefully edited version of the truth. She told him about Mr. Thaddeus Sterling, a wealthy and powerful business associate of their late father. "Our father was a good man, an inventor," she explained, her voice thick with emotion. "He trusted Mr. Sterling, made him a partner. But Sterling was a thief. He embezzled from the company, ruined it, and then he framed our father for his own crimes." She paused, swallowing hard. "Our father died in prison. His name disgraced his heart, broken. We were left with nothing but his debts and Sterling's suffocating pity. He offered to take us in to make us his wards, but it wasn't kindness, it was possession. He has a fixation. He wanted to control us, to own the last remnants of the man he destroyed." Her confession hung in the cold night air. We didn't just come here for a new start, Mr. Dalton. We came here to escape him. The man in town. I believe he was hired by Sterling to find us." Beau was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains, their peaks like jagged teeth against the night sky. He had taken them in, thinking his biggest problem was logistics and finances. Now he was facing a threat far more insidious, a wealthy, ruthless man from back east with the power to hire Pinkertons and destroy lives. He was harboring fugitives. His instinct was to cut his losses, to tell them they had to leave, that their problems were not his. But then he looked at Nora. He saw the terror in her eyes, warring with the fierce pride that refused to let her break down completely. He thought of his brothers, of the life that had started to bloom in his house, Owen's quiet smiles, Finn's grudging admiration, Reese's pure joy. These women, these sisters, were no longer just strangers. They were becoming part of the fabric of the ranch. "What did Sterling frame your father for?" Beau asked, his voice a low rumble. "Fraud," Nora whispered. "He claimed our father stole blueprints for a new type of industrial steam valve and sold them. But father invented them. Sterling stole the patent paperwork and created a false trail of evidence. The proof of our father's innocence. It was in a private ledger he kept. The ledger vanished after he was arrested. Sterling has it, I'm sure of it." Beau nodded slowly, his mind working. The situation had changed. This wasn't just a domestic complication anymore. This was a fight, and if there was one thing the Daltons knew how to do, it was fight. "He finds you here, he'll likely try to use the law," Beau reasoned. "He'll claim you're runaway debtors or that he's your legal guardian." "He will stop at nothing to drag us back," Nora confirmed, her voice barely audible. Beau looked away from the mountains and met her gaze directly. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. "Let him come," he said, his voice hard as Montana iron. "This ranch has stood against blizzards, droughts, and cattle rustlers. I suppose it can stand against one fancy man from Boston." In that moment, the alliance between them was forged. It was no longer a 1-month trial. It was a pact sealed in the darkness under the silent watch of the stars. They were in this together now, for better or for worse, and they both knew, with a chilling certainty, that the worst was yet to come. The arrival of Thaddeus Sterling was not the thunderous storm they had braced for, but a slow, creeping fog. He didn't ride up to the ranch with a posse of hired guns. Instead, he arrived in Promise Creek in a rented buckboard, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that seemed to repel the dust of the street. He was a handsome man in his late 40s, with silvering temples, and a smile that was both charming and predatory. He took a room at the town's only hotel and began his assault not with violence, but with influence. His first move was to visit the local bank. The Dalton Ranch, like most, ran on credit, secured by a mortgage note held by that very bank. Sterling, with his East Coast money and polished manners, spent an hour with the bank president. By the time he left, he had purchased the Daltons' note. He now held their financial fate in his hands. His next stop was Henderson's General Store, where he paid off the Daltons' outstanding account with a casual flick of his wrist, a gesture that was part generosity, part power play. He spoke to the townsfolk, introducing himself as the Vance sisters' benevolent guardian, expressing his deep concern for their welfare after they had been lured away to this harsh and unforgiving land. He painted a picture of himself as a savior, and the Daltons as opportunistic kidnappers. Word of Sterling's campaign reached the ranch via a shaken Mr. Henderson. "He's smooth, Beau," the store owner warned. "Got the ear of half the town already. Says he's here to rescue those girls." The tension at the ranch became a palpable thing. The sisters were pale and withdrawn, starting at every sound. The easy laughter of the previous weeks had vanished. "He's trying to isolate us," Beau said, or grimly pacing the main room. "Turn the town against us, cut off our supplies, then foreclose on the ranch. He wants to leave us with nothing, so you have no choice but to go with him. There is always a choice." Izzy declared, her eyes flashing with fire, but her voice held a tremor she couldn't conceal. The confrontation they had all dreaded came 3 days later. Sterling rode out to the ranch, not alone, but with the town sheriff, a portly, officious man named Bartholomew. The Pinkerton Mr. Davies followed at a discreet distance, his face impassive. The 8 members of the household stood united on the porch as Sterling dismounted. "Eleonora, my dear girl," Sterling began, his voice oozing concern as he approached the steps. "Thank heavens I've found you. I have been worried to death." "We are not your dear girls, Thaddeus," Nora replied, her voice cold and steady. "And we are not in need of your concern." Sterling's smile tightened. "I am your legal guardian, appointed by the courts after your father's unfortunate business. These men have taken advantage of you. Sheriff," he said, turning to Bartholomew, "I want these women returned to my custody." "Now hold on, Mr. Sterling," Beau interjected, stepping forward to stand beside Nora. "These ladies are here of their own free will. They are our betrothed." A collective, sharp intake of breath came from the brothers and sisters behind him. It was a lie, a desperate, monumental one, but it was the only shield they had. Sterling laughed, a condescending, unpleasant sound. "Betrothed. You expect me to believe that 4 lonely men and 4 penniless women. This is a transaction, not a romance, and it is one I will not permit." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his coat. "This is a court order from Boston affirming my guardianship. And this," he added, producing another document with a flourish, "is the deed to this ranch's mortgage. You are on my property, Dalton. I could have you evicted by morning." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Beau, the man has papers." It felt like a checkmate. They were trapped legally and financially. It was Owen, the quiet, scholarly brother, who spoke up. "Your guardianship order, Mr. Sterling. It is from a Massachusetts court. Does it hold jurisdiction here in the Montana Territory?" Sterling's eyes narrowed. "It is a legal document." "Perhaps," Owen continued, his confidence growing. "But territorial law is a complex thing. I imagine Sheriff Bartholomew would need to consult with a territorial judge before enforcing an out-of-state order, especially one concerning adult women who claim to be here by choice. It could become a very lengthy and complicated legal matter." A flicker of annoyance crossed Sterling's face. He hadn't counted on a backwoods farmer knowing anything about jurisprudence. While the legal argument bought them time, it didn't solve the immediate threat. The proof they needed, the ledger that could exonerate their father and incriminate Sterling, was the key. But it was lost, likely destroyed years ago. That evening the mood in the house was grim. Hope was dwindling. Rose, who had been quiet and pale throughout the ordeal, was sitting by the fire, her hands twisting a piece of cloth in her lap. She looked over at her mother's old quilting basket, a worn wicker thing she had insisted on bringing with them. It was filled with scraps of fabric, spools of thread, and her art supplies. Suddenly her eyes widened. "The quilt," she whispered. "What is it?" "Rose," Nora asked, rushing to her side. "Father's memory quilt," Rose said, her voice trembling with a dawning realization. Mother was making it for him before he was taken. She was so angry, so heartbroken. She said she was sewing his truth into the very fabric of it. I never understood what she meant. She scrambled to the basket and pulled out a large, unfinished quilt. It was a beautiful but somber piece made of dark blues and greys. But as Rose turned it over, she pointed to the backing cloth. Along the edges, sewn with infinitesimally small stitches in a thread that was nearly the same color as the fabric was writing. The others crowded around. It wasn't just writing. It was a coded message, page numbers, dates, and cryptic phrases. "It's a key," Owen breathed, his mind racing. "It's not the ledger itself, but a guide to it. She must have known the original would be found. This refers to a second, hidden copy." "But where?" Izzy demanded. "A copy of what? Father's invention journals." Nora said, her heart pounding. "He kept duplicate copies of everything. He was meticulous. He stored them with his solicitor, Mr. Abernathy, for safekeeping." The message on the quilt contained references that only someone familiar with the journals would understand. It was a cipher. But the journals were in Boston, and Sterling was on their doorstep. It was Finn the gambler who saw the opening. "We don't need the journals," he said, a slow, cunning smile spreading across his face. "We just need Sterling to think we have them." He looked at the Pinkerton Mr. Davies, who had been observing the whole affair with a professional detachment. "That detective, he's not Sterling's man. He's a Pinkerton. They have a reputation. They value facts, not just who's paying them. We need to play a different game." Finn's plan was audacious. The next morning, he rode into town and found Mr. Davies in the hotel restaurant. He didn't threaten or plead. He laid a single carefully chosen page from Rose's sketchbook on the table. On it, Owen had helped her meticulously transcribe a section of the quilt's code. "My future father-in-law was a very careful man, Mr. Davies," Finn said coolly. "He documented every transaction, every meeting. Mr. Sterling believes he has the only copies of certain incriminating documents. He is mistaken. The originals are safe. This is just a small sample of the proof we hold." Davies studied the paper, his expression unreadable. "Sterling is a powerful man," the detective said non-committally. "Powerful men have the most to lose," Finn countered. "You were hired to find 4 missing women. You've found them. Your job is done. But getting involved in a fraud and conspiracy case that crosses state lines, that's a whole different kind of trouble, especially when the evidence is about to become public." Finn left the paper on the table and walked away. It was a colossal bluff. They had nothing but a coded quilt, but they had planted a seed of doubt in the one man who operated on a code of professional integrity. The final reckoning happened that afternoon. Sterling, enraged and impatient, rode to the ranch again, this time alone, and without the pretense of civility. "This farce is over," he snarled at Bo and Nora, who met him in the yard. "You will be off this land by sundown, and the girls are coming with me." "They're going nowhere," Bo said, his hand resting near the Colt peacemaker on his hip. "You're a fool, Dalton," Sterling sneered. "You think you can fight me? I own you." At that moment, Mr. Davies rode into the yard, reining his horse to a stop. He looked not at the Daltons but at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Davies said, his voice flat and official. "My agency has been in contact with our Boston office. Some irregularities concerning your past business with the late Mr. Vance have come to light. They are reopening the investigation based on new potential evidence." Sterling's face went white. The bluff had worked. Davies, unwilling to be party to a potential felony, had made his own inquiries. He had called Finn's bluff, but in doing so had created a very real threat to Sterling. "That's a lie, a fabrication by these peasants." Sterling stammered, his composure shattering. "Perhaps," Davies said calmly. "But a formal investigation has begun. I've been instructed by my superiors to withdraw from this case and report my findings. They do not look kindly on clients who omit crucial details such as accusations of fraud and stolen intellectual property. You may have bought a mortgage, sir, but you can't buy the Pinkerton Detective Agency." Sterling stared his face, a mask of fury and disbelief. He had been outmaneuvered. He was a man who operated in the shadows, using wealth and influence as his weapons. The threat of open legal scrutiny of his own carefully constructed past being dismantled was the one thing he feared. He shot a look of pure venom at Nora and her sisters, and then at the 4 brothers standing solidly beside them. Without another word, he wrenched his horse around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and impotent rage in his wake. He was gone. The immediate threat had passed. A wave of relief so profound it was dizzying washed over the 8 people in the yard. They had faced down the monster from their past, not with guns, but with courage, cunning, and the unbreakable bond of family. They looked at each other, 4 brothers and 4 sisters, no longer as strangers in a desperate arrangement, but as allies who had fought and won a battle for their collective future. The dust from Thaddeus Sterling's furious departure settled slowly, coating the hard-packed earth of the yard in a final, gritty farewell. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence was a physical presence, vast and echoing, broken only by the nervous stamp of a horse and the sigh of the wind through the eaves of the barn. They stood together, the 8 of them, blinking in the bright Montana sun, as if waking from a long, shared nightmare. The shadow that had loomed over the Vance sisters for years, that had driven them across a continent and dictated their every fear, had finally blessedly receded. Sheriff Bartholomew was the first to break the tableau. He cleared his throat, a loud, gravelly sound in the quiet, and removed his hat, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. He looked from the empty road where Sterling had vanished to the united front on the porch. His gaze fell on Beau, and for the first time held not officious duty, but a grudging respect. "Well, Dalton," he mumbled, his eyes averted. Seems I misjudged the situation. A man shows up with papers. A man of means. It's hard to see past the shine of his boots." He looked over at Nora and her sisters. "My apologies, ladies. Glad you're safe." With a final curt nod, he heaved himself back onto his horse and rode toward town, a man clearly eager to be free of a conflict far more complex than stolen cattle. "Mr. Turr," Davies the Pinkerton remained. He dismounted and walked toward the porch, his movements precise and economical. He stopped before Beau, his face as impassive as ever, but his eyes held a flicker of professional interest. "My client has, it would appear, terminated my employment," he said dryly. "My agency was hired to locate the Vance sisters. They have been located. My report will state that they are safe and residing here of their own volition." He paused. "It will also include a recommendation for a formal review of Mr. Sterling's business practices based on certain potential discrepancies." Finn, ever the opportunist, clapped the detective on the shoulder. "You're an honorable man, Mr. Davies. If you're ever out of work, the Daltons could use a man who can spot a cheat." A rare, thin smile touched Davies's lips. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Dalton, but I find employment is rarely scarce when dealing with men like Thaddeus Sterling." He tipped his bowler hat to the sisters. "Ladies?" And with that, he too mounted up and rode away, a figure of dispassionate justice, vanishing back into the anonymity of the frontier. They were alone. The threat was truly gone. It was then that the dam of composure broke. Jenny, her face crumpling, let out a sob that was equal parts grief and pure, unadulterated relief. Reese was by her side in an instant, his arm around her, as she wept into his shoulder. Rose leaned against a porch post, her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together, her silent tears tracing paths through the dust on her cheeks. Izzy stood ramrod straight, her chin high, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the railing, her fierce pride the only thing keeping her knees from buckling. And Nora simply closed her eyes, letting the full weight of their deliverance wash over her. For the first time since their father's arrest, the constant gnawing fear in the pit of her stomach was gone. In its place was an exhaustion so profound it felt as if she could sleep for a week. She felt a strong, steady hand on her arm, and opened her eyes to see Bo standing beside her, his expression one of quiet understanding. "Let's get inside," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's over." Inside, the air was thick with unspoken emotions. They moved with a strange new awkwardness. Bo's lie to the sheriff, "They are our betrothed," hung between them all, no longer a desperate shield, but a monumental question mark. The women who had been their mail-order brides, then their house guests, then their co-conspirators were now— What the brothers gathered for a moment by the barn, ostensibly to check on the livestock, but really to grapple with the new reality. "Betrothed Bo," Finn said, leaning against a stall door with a wry grin. "You don't do things by halves, do you?" "It was what was needed," Bo said gruffly, though a faint flush crept up his neck. "I liked the sound of it," Reese declared, his chest puffed out. It felt right. Owen, ever the thinker, watched the house. "It was a public declaration, Bo, in front of the sheriff. Words like that have weight in a town like Promise Creek. We can't simply pretend they weren't said." "I don't intend to—" Bo stated, his gaze fixed on the kitchen window where he could see Nora's silhouette. And with that, he turned and walked back toward the house, leaving his brothers to exchange looks of astonishment. The evening meal was a quiet affair, but the silence was comfortable, laced with contentment. Afterwards, as a soft twilight painted the sky in hues of purple and rose, the real conversations began, each pair finding their own space to navigate the landscape of their future. Finn found Izzy by the corral. The fiery defiance in her posture finally softened. The setting sun caught the auburn strands in her hair, and for a moment his breath caught in his throat. "He's really gone," she said, her voice soft. "For years I've imagined what I would say to him, what I would do if I ever saw him again. I thought I'd be screaming. Instead, I just felt tired." "You have a right to be," Finn said, coming to stand beside her. "You've been fighting a war your whole life." He hesitated, his usual glibness failing him. Isabel. I've known a lot of women. Women who were charming, beautiful, easy to talk to. And then I met you." He let out a short laugh. "You were none of those things. You were difficult, suspicious, and you looked at me like I was something you'd scrape off your boot." She turned to him, an eyebrow raised. "Is this your idea of a proposal?" "Just listen," he said, his tone growing serious. "It took me a while to realize that your prickles were just armor to protect the softest heart I've ever known. I saw how you protect your sisters. I saw you stand up to Sterling without an ounce of fear. Your fire, it's not just for show. It's real. It keeps you warm, and it keeps everyone around you honest. It sure as hell keeps me honest." He reached out his hand, gently covering hers on the fence rail. "This whole thing started as a joke to me, a gamble. But it's not a game anymore. I don't want a bride I ordered from a catalogue. I want the stubborn, brilliant, fiercely loyal woman who's standing right in front of me. I'm a gambler and a troublemaker, Isabel Vance. But I'm willing to bet everything I have for the rest of my life on you." Izzy stared at him, her lips parted. She saw past the charming rogue to the steadfast man he'd become. "You'd be making a terrible bet, Finn Dalton. she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the first sure thing I've ever seen," he replied, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. A single tear escaped her eye, and she hastily wiped it away. "All right, gambler," she said, a shaky but genuine smile finally breaking through. "You've got a deal." Inside, Owen found Rose in the main room. She had taken out the memory quilt and spread it across the table. But she wasn't looking at the coded message of a dark past. She was tracing the patterns her mother had sewn her expression, one of gentle sorrow. "She would have loved this place," Rose said quietly as Owen approached. "The mountains, the wildflowers. She would have made a quilt of the sunset. She put her love for your father and her hope for your future into this." Owen set his hand, resting lightly on the fabric. "It's a testament to her strength, a strength you share." He saw the sketchbook lying nearby. "My letter to the Matrimonial Times said I was looking for a woman who loved poetry. I realize now that was foolish. I wasn't looking for someone who loved poetry. I was looking for someone who was poetry. Someone who sees the beauty in a sunset, the story in a piece of fabric, the hope in a new garden. You don't just see the world, Rose. You make it more beautiful." He gently took her hand, his touch sending a warmth through her. "I know you've only known sorrow and uncertainty for a very long time. I want to offer you peace and joy. I want to spend my days watching you draw and my nights reading to you by the fire. Would you consider making a life with me? Here." Rose looked up at him, her large, gentle eyes swimming with tears. She couldn't find the words. She simply nodded, a sob of happiness catching in her throat, and launched herself into his arms. He held her tightly, this quiet, gentle man who had seen the art in her soul. Reese and Jenny's moment came in the garden they had started to till together. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and new beginnings. For them there were no grand speeches. Their connection was as simple and true as the soil under their feet. Reese, his face flushed with a sincerity that was achingly pure, stopped his work and simply looked at her. "Jenny," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Before you came, this was just a patch of dirt, and now, look." He gestured to the neat rows of tiny green shoots. "You did that. You bring life to things." He took a deep breath. "My whole life, I've watched my brothers wanting to be like them. Brave like Bo, charming like Finn, smart like Owen. But since you got here, I just want to be a man that you could be proud of. I think I've been in love with you since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. I don't want this to be pretend or an arrangement. I want it to be real. Forever. Will you marry me?" Her answering yes was a joyful cry that echoed in the quiet evening. She threw her arms around his neck, and he spun her around, their laughter, the purest sound on the ranch. That left Bo and Nora, the two pillars. They were the last ones awake, the quiet of the house settling around them as they sat at the rough-hewn kitchen table. A single lamp cast a warm glow, creating an island of light in the darkness. The weight of their siblings' happiness, of the entire future, seemed to rest on their shoulders. "It seems we are to be overrun with weddings," Nora said, her voice soft as she folded a stray dishcloth. "It seems so," Bo replied, his gaze intense. "My brothers have good sense." He paused. "It was a lie what I told the sheriff. We weren't betrothed." "I know," she whispered, her eyes on the table. "I need you to know why I said it," he continued, leaning forward. "It wasn't just to protect you. It was to protect this." He swept a hand out, indicating the house, the ranch, the new life blooming within it. "To protect us. He stood and walked around the table to stand before her, making her look up. Nora, before you and your sisters arrived, this house was just a place to sleep. The ranch was just work. My life was about survival, about getting to the next day, about keeping my brothers fed. I was lonely, though I would never have admitted it. I was just existing. His voice was a low, earnest rumble. Then you came. You walked off that stagecoach, carrying the weight of the world, and you never once buckled. I've watched you care for your sisters with a strength that could move mountains. I've watched you work until your hands were raw to make this place a home. You've brought more than order and good cooking, Nora. You've brought laughter. You've brought hope. You've brought life back into these walls and back into me. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in a way it never did when facing down a blizzard or a rustler. I didn't send a letter to the Matrimonial Times, but if I had, I would have described a woman of courage, of integrity, of unshakable strength, a partner. I would have been asking for you. Eleanor Vance. I am asking you now, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building a future with me here? Not because of a contract or because of a threat we defeated, but because this is where we both belong. Together. Tears she had refused to shed in fear or sorrow now flowed freely in profound, overwhelming joy. She looked up at this stoic, steadfast man who had offered her shelter and ended up offering her his very soul. Bo Dalton. She whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she rose to her feet. I came here seeking a refuge. I never dreamed I would find a home. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, I will. He reached down and pulled her into his arms, his embrace both powerful and gentle. In the quiet kitchen of the Dalton Ranch, under the vast Montana sky, the last vestiges of the mail-order arrangement dissolved, replaced by a new foundation of love, respect, and a peace that had been fought for and won. 4 weddings were on the horizon, not as the fulfillment of a desperate contract, but as the joyful, defiant celebration of a new dynasty, a sprawling, unlikely family about to put down deep and lasting roots. And so, the story of the 4 Dalton brothers and the 4 Vance sisters transformed from a tale of desperate measures into a legend of the American West. It wasn't just a story about mail-order brides. It was about the forging of a family in the crucible of adversity. They proved that a home is not just built with logs and nails, but with courage, loyalty, and love. They faced down threats from the past and embraced the promise of the future, turning a risky gamble into a legacy that would echo through the valleys of Montana for generations. Their union was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most unexpected arrivals lead to the most extraordinary destinations. If this story of love, courage, and family on the frontier moved you, and if you believe that the strongest bonds are the ones we choose to build, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a great story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life tales from the heart of the Old West. What part of their journey touched you the most? Let us know in the comments below.